9. RMS Royal Oak. During World War I, HMS Royal Oak was one of the 5 Revenge-class battleships built for the Royal Navy. Completed in 1916, the ship first saw action as part of the Grand Fleet at the Battle of Jutland. During peacetime, she operated in the Atlantic, home, and Mediterranean fleets, and was attacked numerous times. Royal Oak received international notice in 1928 when her top commanders were controversially court-martialed, causing significant humiliation to what was then the world's greatest fleet. Attempts to modernize Royal Oak throughout the course of her 25-year career were futile, and by the onset of World War II, she was no longer fit for frontline duty. The ship was anchored in Scapa Flow in Orkney, Scotland in October in 1939, when she was sunk by the German submarine U-47. 835 of Royal Oak's 1,234 men and youths were killed that night, or died later from their wounds. The loss of the ancient ship, the first of 5 Royal Navy battleships and battlecruisers destroyed during World War II, had minimal effect on the British Navy's and its allies' numerical supremacy, but it had a significant impact on wartime morale. 10 divers from the Royal Navy's Northern Diving Group, based in Faslane, lifted the flag in the spooky underwater stillness before attaching it to an upper prop shaft and honoring the deceased in a solemn ceremony. The horrific image of HMS Royal Oak was generated 12 years ago electronically by combining a collection of images and video footage. The only way to see the disaster through the muddy seas is a single image. Even on the brightest days, vision is limited to around 50 feet, 15 meters. On poor days, it's almost non-existent. The wreck has been classified as a war grave, and under the Protection of Military Remains Act of 1986, all diving or other illegal types of investigation are forbidden. 8. Tugboat Graveyard. Located in the ports of New York and New Jersey lie some of history's most cherished vessels. Arthur Kill is a graveyard where old ferries, barges, and tugboats are brought and left behind. John J. Witt, the reason behind the collection, insisted that they remain and not be dismantled. It stayed that way right up until his passing in 1980. After his death, it was handed down to his son-in-law, Joe Coyne, and then it was passed down to Joe's son, Arnold. Throughout John's days, as many as 400 relics could be found in his collection, but that number's since dropped to 200. The Arthur Kill is home to NYC's Fire Deputy Abram S. Hewitt, who assisted in the attempt to rescue passengers from the paddle steamer PS General Slocum, which caught fire and sank during a fatal trip to Long Island that resulted in over 1,000 deaths. A D-Day boat, the New England passenger steamer, is also amongst the relics after having had a long career. And then there's the Eldia, a steel freighter that was 469 feet, 143 meters long, and was blown ashore on March 29, 1984. The owner had planned on fixing it, but ran out of funds and it was later scrapped instead. Today, Arthur Kill holds some of the most cherished and memorable relics to date. Everyone from marine historians, artists, photographers, documentary makers, and even urban explorers come to see Arthur Kill, despite it being hard to get to and out of reach. They often use boats or kayaks to paddle alongside the relics to do some deeper exploring. Part of the movie can be seen in the movie Salt, starring Angelina Jolie. A 32-minute documentary was made on it called Graves of Arthur Kill in 2012. This place has gained such immense popularity over the years that there's an Instagram page dedicated to posting the best pictures people send in. 7. The Great Blue Hole. The Caribbean Sea submerged a series of gigantic tunnels more than 10,000 years ago as a result of rising seas at the conclusion of the last big ice age. The Belize Blue Hole, a nearly perfectly round stretch of blue water, approximately 980 feet, 300 meters wide, and 410 feet, 125 meters deep, was formed by geological causes. It's located in the heart of Lighthouse Reef, an offshore atoll 60 miles, 96.5 kilometers from Belize City. In the 1970s, French marine biologist Jacques Cousteau listed it among the top 10 diving locations in the world. The Belize Blue Hole draws divers from all over the world because of the incredible experience of exploring giant underwater stalactites and stalagmites, some reaching up to 40 feet or 12 meters in length, and surreal, gorgeous tunnels at its depth. Due to the difficulty of the diving anticipated, only experienced divers with a minimum of 24 completed dives are permitted to enter. Sharks inhabit the Blue Hole, including bull sharks, Caribbean reef sharks, and the rare hammerhead shark. It's one of the 7 wonders of Belize's World Heritage Site, and National Geographic has listed it as number 1 on the list of 10 most amazing places on Earth, and it's even visible from space. Let us know in the comments if you'd dive here. Don't forget to subscribe before the end of the video. 6. Chuuk Lagoon. The Chuuk Lagoon facility in the South Pacific was destroyed by America during Operation Hailstone on February 17th and 18th. Japan lost almost 250 planes and 137 tons of ships, the ruins of which may still be found at the lagoon's bottom, the world's largest ship and aircraft cemetery. All of the ships discovered are considered Japanese war graves. The event is frequently referred to as the Japanese counterpart of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Chuuk Lagoon is now regarded as one of the best wreck diving locations in the world. Chuuk Lagoon, formerly Truk Atoll, is located 1,800 kilometers and consists of a barrier reef encircling a natural harbor. The nearby Chuuk Islands had been inhabited since the 14th century AD, but were claimed by the Spanish Empire, the German Empire, and finally the Empire of Japan in 1914, when it took the lagoon from Germany during World War I. A US naval strike on the Japanese Imperial Naval Facility at Chuuk in 1944 destroyed it. The Japanese withdrew their bigger battleships after being warned. However, the onslaught, known as Operation Hailstone, lasted 3 days, with US bombers sinking 12 smaller warships and 32 commercial ships, as well as 275 aircraft. The destruction of Chuuk Lagoon's base stopped it from posing a significant danger to the Allies in the Central Pacific, especially after it was struck again in June 1945 by British naval troops. 25 years later, Jacques Cousteau, William A. Brown, and their crew visited Chuuk Lagoon. In 1971, Cousteau broadcast a television program explaining his discoveries, capturing the attention of divers all over the world. Chuuk saw the establishment of the first scuba diving company in 1973, and since then, both scuba divers and snorkelers have been blowing bubbles in the South Pacific seas. The wrecks of Chuuk Lagoon are continually being discovered, but what distinguishes them from other wrecks is the presence of submarines, battleships, airplanes, motorbikes, train wagons, and a variety of weaponry. Divers willing to undertake the lengthy journey to Chuuk Lagoon will unearth a variety of riches, including machine gun ammo, medical supplies, aircraft engines, vehicles, deck guns, torpedoes, and submarine periscopes. Today, visitors to the Chuuk Lagoon may scuba dive among the magnificent preserved relics of the Japanese Imperial Navy fleet. Divers can spend hours examining the site's wrecks, returning numerous times without encountering the same wreckage twice, bearing witness to Operation Hailstone's massive damage. 5. Ramu Underwater Prison. Ramu is a tiny town in northern Estonia, about 28 miles, 45 kilometers from Tallinn. While few people have heard of the location, it has a hidden treasure for divers, an underwater jail in Estonia. Quarrying at Ramu began in 1938, with convicts from Ramu prison, previously known as Muru, mining limestone and marble and living in a prison camp in the quarry. Following Estonia's independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, the government disbanded the camp and abandoned the property. The mine drained groundwater out of the quarry and into the surrounding town for use in fields when it was in operation. However, once it was abandoned, the quarry floor began to flood once more, bringing with it the jail structures that had held prisoners. Today, the quarry bottom is home to an underwater metropolis, making it a popular diving location. The surviving structures are now deteriorated and covered with graffiti. The spectacular limestone dunes and the pure blue ocean, on the other hand, are simply stunning. 4. Lake Resen Bell Tower. There were once 3 lakes, Lake Resen, the Curon, and San Valentino alla Muta. They were linked by a dam in 1950, which tragically flooded Ground Village, its buildings, and its grounds. Residents were forced to flee, and just the 14th century church tower survived in the village. It appears out of nowhere, and it transforms Lake Resen into a wonderfully attractive and fantastic spot, a symbol of the entire valley. When the lake freezes over in the winter, the bell tower may be reached on foot. Development for a lesser artificial lake began in 1920, but a new concept for a considerably larger and deeper lake was submitted in 1939. The newest design would combine 2 natural lakes, but it would submerge several settlements. Construction on the newer lake began in 1940, but due to local opposition and the progress of the Second World War, it was not finished for another decade, at least until 1950. The Edison Energy Company improved on the 1920 proposal for an artificial lake in July 1939. This newer concept was intended for a depth of 72 feet, 22 meters, by combining 2 existing natural lakes, Resensee and Mittersee. The idea would allow for the building of a dam to deliver power to the region by constructing this artificial lake. Unfortunately, this would drown several existing communities, including Graun, Resen, Arlung, Piz, and Stokkerhof. Almost a decade later, despite fierce opposition from the locals, the corporation got funds for the construction of a dam that would aid in the formation of the lake. Over 150 homes were damaged, and over 1,200 acres of land had to be drowned in order to build this lake. At the bottom of the lake is a full village and town, complete with roads, stores, and schools. The water was also not deep enough to sink the church tower, so it's the only building visible above the surface. Local legend has it that the tower's bells can still be heard ringing. These bells are reported to be heard during the darkest hours and the harshest winters. This is unsettling, because the tower's bells were dismantled about 70 years ago when building on the lake began. 3. SS City of Adelaide. The SS City of Adelaide, launched in 1863 from Glasgow, Scotland, initially shuttled people between Sydney, Melbourne, and Honolulu. The ship was refurbished and converted into a sailing vessel after approximately 30 years. That's when the issues began. First, the boat stopped ferrying passengers and began storing coal and other goods. It caught fire in 1912 and burned for many days before being extinguished. The ship was then bought 3 years later by George Butler, a Magnetic Island resident who thought he might use it as a barrier for a dock in Picnic Bay. Unfortunately, the SS City of Adelaide went ashore at Cockle Bay while being towed to its destination. It remains there to this day, and its state has deteriorated over the decades. The SS City of Adelaide's woes only worsened over time. During World War II, one of the towering masts brought down a bomber during a training exercise, making the ruin dangerous. The crash killed 3 members of the Royal Australian Air Force and 1 member of the United States Navy. Then, in the 1970s, a storm struck nearby, partially collapsing the ship's iron hull. The ship's wreckage is now home to a flourishing forest of marshes. The trees, adapted to life in hard conditions, have made themselves at home amid the submerged ruins of the ship. Interestingly, while the SS City of Adelaide was in service for nearly a century, the marshes are fairly recent. 2. RMS Titanic. The RMS Titanic was the biggest moving thing in the world when it set sail on April 10, 1912. Modern cruise ships would surpass the Titanic's 882-foot, 269-meter length, but at the time, the world marveled at its size. Even now, it remains one of history's most famous ships. The massive ship was marketed as being unsinkable, but the world knows how that turned out. On its inaugural voyage, it collided with an iceberg, and its safety devices were unable to withstand the flood of water that flowed into the ship. The Titanic sank in the chilly Atlantic seas south of Newfoundland less than 3 hours later. Over 1,500 of the 2,224 people on board were killed. Numerous plans for raising the sinking ship were made, but none seemed feasible. The Titanic went down in the water 12,000 feet, and no one knew where it was. In 1985, a Franco-American team discovered the wreck. Until then, explorers assumed the ship had sunk intact. Surprisingly, it was discovered in 2 parts on the ocean floor, 0.3 miles. Both parts had smashed against the bottom, crumpling the bow and causing the stern to fall altogether. However, parts of the ship's interior were discovered relatively undamaged, and the field of debris between the 2 sections is littered with thousands of items. Furniture, diningware, and personal things such as jewelry and toys, as well as the shoes of victims whose remains and clothing were devoured by marine critters and germs litter the bottom. Many of these objects have been discovered and repaired for display, but the ship itself is unlikely to be taken to the surface. The Titanic's health has deteriorated significantly since its finding, and most experts believe it will never be raised. Many people have also stated that doing so would be unethical, because it would mean meddling with the last resting places of hundreds of victims. 1. Underwater forest. An enormous 60,000-year-old cypress forest formerly stood on dry ground in the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Alabama. The trees arose along the banks of a river at the same time as prehistoric humans are thought to have begun migrating out of Africa. Sediment covered old, fallen trees, and water levels progressively rose, covering the entire forest, which remained undisturbed until 2004, when Hurricane Ivan disturbed the seabed, revealing its presence in Mobile Bay. Scientists stated earlier this year that the trees may contain ingredients that might lead to the creation of life-saving drugs. Divers recovered samples of the wood in December 2019 as part of a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration (NOAA)-funded mission. The trees were amazingly well preserved despite being covered in mud for years, preventing oxygen from reaching them and causing deforestation. Over 300 organisms were extracted from the wood, including a previously unknown shipworm species that generated over 100 varieties of bacteria, many of which are new to science and are undergoing DNA analysis to identify their potential medical benefits as anti-cancer and pain medications. According to a NOAA announcement on the finds, at least one shipworm-related bacterium has previously shown potential as an antibiotic against parasitic worm illnesses. Researchers are also looking into the wood's potential usage in paper goods, renewable fuels, chemicals, animal feeds, and other purposes. Thanks for watching. Which underwater discovery was your favorite? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.